I think the first card speaks for itself. Greetings from Hackettstown. And that's what I'm here to tell you about tonight. My involvement in the hobby goes back now, 35 or so years, 36 or 7 years. And started out when I went to a Belvedere High School when they were having a little, I don't know, it was band booster or sports booster flea market in the high school gym. And there were a couple ladies there that had the proverbial shoe boxes of postcards that they had removed from an aunt or a grandmother's attic and were selling. So they had categorized some of them, interestingly enough. Taking the time to do some sorting, I found 14 Hackettstown postcards that day, and I was off and running. When I got up a few years later to about 100 cards in my collection, I said, gee, you know, about how many cards can there be from Hackettstown? Well, then I got to 200 and 300 and 400. At the present time, I'm going to estimate I have somewhere around 1,200 Hackettstown postcards in my collection. And that includes everything pretty much that says Hackettstown on it. I kind of draw the line at the cards that say near Hackettstown, but if it says Hackettstown on it, and I have seen it, I've got it. A little further coverage here of the history of postcard types. As it stated, the first copyright for a postal card was issued in 1861, excuse me. And these were just plain cards, some with a little border around them, and as it says, you know, they're labeled postal card, patent applied for. And then we jump up to the first postcard to be printed as a souvenir happened, or is accepted to have happened in the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Does that agree with your?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Wanted to make sure I had that. Also on these early postcards, the view cards, that is, the picture postcards, they didn't have any space on the back for writing. It was a full one-piece back to be used for the address only. So if someone wanted to write a message on it, they had to write across the picture on the card or write across the white border on the card or the edge of the card in some fashion. This is what we call the pioneer era, the pre-1898 cards, again with that border that I talked about before. This is a postal card, not a picture postcard, so this did have the address on the front and a space on the back for the message. This is obviously a Centenary Collegiate Institute card. The interesting thing here is the age of this card. It's very early. Was mailed September 9th, 1874, so it dates back there, and it's dated in the right on the card here, May 23rd, actually, 1874. I'm sorry, that's when Centenary opened in September. Then the private mailing card was another stage of the development of the postcard as the souvenir card or view card as we know today. The Private Mailing Act of 1898, May 19th, 1898, it was enacted by Congress and allowed the card. This one you can see has the back only for the address. And the undivided back, which is, again, only for the address, continued through March 1st, 1907. Little interesting tidbit here. If you look up by the stamp, you'll see the postmark mailed from Hackettstown, November 12th, 1907. And then you'll see the Frenchtown receipt postmark over here, November 12th, 1907. Cards were delivered, mail was delivered very quickly, local mail that is. The trains ran through towns once, maybe twice a day, and the mail was sorted immediately and put in a bag, put on the train. This one arrived in Frenchtown the day it was mailed. This is a type of postcard referred to as real photo. Basically, it's a photograph printed as a postcard. And these are truly treasures as far as local views are concerned. They capture a moment that quite typically was not captured in any other form. Circa 1900, the early 1900s, we're talking about a period when the Kodak Brownie camera was just introduced in 1900, and people were using them sparingly because they were expensive. The development of film was expensive compared to the wage of the day. So they weren't taking pictures of everything they saw. They would take photographs of family members, their home perhaps, personal photographs, but not shooting everything like we do today or what became popular in years after this. This is a fireman's parade in 1907, and it captures this intersection by High Street and Grand Avenue coming down Main Street, heading east or south on Route 517 Main Street, west, coming from the west. But again, it just captures this image of the day. This was a phenomenal parade in Hackettstown, by the way. There were estimated to be upwards of 10,000 visitors and firemen involved in this parade, so the town just had to be absolutely full, as well as the surrounding area. This is another view. I believe I see 1911 on one of the license plates on a car under magnification. I'm not positive. But again, this is a parade in town. I'm not sure of exactly which street this is because there's not a landmark that I can really connect with, or haven't yet anyway. But obviously the parade, the cars are well decorated for a parade. I like this card for a couple of reasons. A real photo postcard captures a family in the family horse-drawn carriage of the day. But if you look at that little booth on the far right, the curtain over it and the banner over it says a Postal Photo Studio. It was set up in the Hackettstown Grove, known as Sully's Grove and Kempel's Grove at a couple of different points in time. But it just, again, captures the moment, and it also demonstrates clearly how some of these real photo postcards were produced and how the images were taken, in this case by a professional itinerant photographer who set up shop on the grounds for the day and took pictures, including, I presume, this one. We talked a moment ago, and I'll talk some more about it, about buildings and scenes that aren't there anymore. This is the bottling establishment of Thomas Grogan. He bottled beer, ale, porter, and mineral water there. This was on the corner of Liberty and Franklin Streets in town. Some of the building is still there, but it's a private residence now, and you would recognize nothing associated with this image. The interesting information that I've learned about Thomas Grogan and his employees were, there were shops in town. There were a couple of major businesses like Lackawanna Leather Company and the American Sawmill at the time. And they had a route that they would run late morning, noontime, or lunchtime, close to it, and deliver beer and ale right to the workplace so that the employees could have it with their lunch. A little different than today's standards, but that was part of his business, to run a business route, if you will. Another building that's no longer there, the hat factory in Hackettstown, was burnt once and rebuilt, burned down again. About 1907, I think, well, in 1907 it burned the second time, completely destroyed by fire. In another view, I have two views of this. You can see some of the elevation in the background where the railroad crossed High Street, what's now High Street, and continued eastward, would be to the right of this view here. If you are familiar at all with Hackettstown, where the M&M Candy Company is now on High Street, Well, just before the last street on the right before you approach M&M is Miller Street, and the Miller Street Firehouse now stands approximately where this hat factory stood. The property was vacant for many, many years until the firehouse was built there, I believe in 1971. Another image that we wouldn't otherwise have of Hackettstown's first ambulance that was sponsored by and operated by the American Legion, Post 164. You can see all that on the belt of the vehicle. 1928 Dodge, again, a moment in time captured, and a view that wouldn't otherwise exist, or probably doesn't. This may have been associated with the Firemen's Parade of 1907 because of the full dress and the formal pose, but I don't know. The photo isn't dated, but this is the Hackettstown Band seated and standing alongside of the Presbyterian Church, which is located on Main Street in Hackettstown. And I'm sorry, I'm in the way here. Again, full dress shows what the uniforms look like with the spiked helmets, almost reminiscent of German World War I helmets, but this predates the German helmet, I guess. All right. Moving on with the real photo postcards, this is a house that stands at 807 High Street, approximately across from the M&M Candy Company. And the house was added on to, and I will say very poorly. On the left side there was a library room built by the owner of the house at the time. And of course this porch on the front had been enclosed, which is not appropriate to the federal style of house. This is one of the older houses in Hackettstown, built right around 1800, give or take a couple of years, but a very nice house. With this view that was supplied to the M&M Candy Company, when they purchased the house, they were able to see what the original house looked like. They took that ugly addition off of the side of it. They also opened up the porch in the front and took the enclosed porch out, so it looks much more like its original form. And I think they use this for executive visitors and that sort of thing, maybe some business meetings and that type of thing, but it is owned by the M&M Mars company now. And the good news is that when they put that library addition on the side, they did no more damage to the original structure of the house than taking the sashes out of a couple windows and stepped over a very low windowsill to get into this room. So the original structure was not compromised, fortunately. Now we get into the divided back era. Began 1907 that's March 1st, 1907 is when the divided era began, the divided back, that is, so there was room for a message on one side, the address on the other, and a full view on the front of the card. What my comment is there, it's the golden age of postcard collecting, and I think that this dovetails well into what Don said before about the onset of the huge popularity of the hobby of collecting postcards and exchanging them in the early 1900s as a hobby, and cards were kept and treasured. Fortunately for us collectors, this is the front of a typical divided back card. I'm not sure if that's the back goes with this one, I'm not positive, but at any rate, this is a full view card of the type that began to be produced in 1907. This is the original Centenary Collegiate Institute building, which was built in 1874, and well, it was started construction in the late 1860s, but it took a few years to build it. Opened its doors, as I mentioned before, September 9th, 1874 to the first students, but unfortunately was burned to the ground in a very destructive fire on Halloween 1899, and the building was replaced. The Connected with the original building is another view card. Again, sometimes a little bit morbid, but all things were covered in postcard collecting, including this monument to Tillie Smith, who was an employee of Centenary College. I think she was 18 or 19 when she was murdered. Suspected to have been murdered by an employee of Centenary, James Titus. I digress a little bit here. But there was a very interesting study of that case in more recent years, and a very strong case was made for the fact that it was two other perpetrators of the crime and not James Titus, who spent 17 years in prison for the deed that he confessed to, basically to shield his family from being dragged through more court procedures. This monument was purchased and supplied by the townspeople of Hackettstown, which it says, here, I'm not going to remember the exact wording off the top of my head, but by an appreciative public or something like that, it says. This was the new college that was built and completed in 1901 when it opened its doors. And these buildings still stand as the primary front buildings that you see when you approach Centenary. What's called now the C Administration Building in the center, and on either side are the curved dorms. To nearest me, the South Dorm, which was the girls' dorm. On the far side, the North Dorm, or the boys' dorm, when it was still a co-ed college. It later became an all-girls school for many years, and of course, as we know now, it's again co-ed. Not a lot has changed with the front buildings. There you can see the C Administration Building, and you can see the dorms on the side. Of course, the campus has expanded considerably since then. But you can see the cupola, the front of the building, looking very much unchanged. Other scenes that wouldn't otherwise be preserved if it weren't for postcards. A few things can be noted here. To the left, if you go up the street now, you can see the houses are very much the same as they were then. There are trees on the street, not quite as many. They come and go as they have to be replaced or become rotted and have to be taken down, but there are still a nice group of trees on High Street. This is looking in from Main Street, looking east on to High Street towards M&M. On the far side is the building, which is still there. It does show you that there's some vacant lots between Main Street, and that's the corner of High and Franklin Street. And that building is now the Scala Memorial Funeral Home. It's passed through many hands, but is now a funeral home. Another picture that we wouldn't otherwise have or view if it weren't for cards. Sorry if I'm repeating myself too much here. I'll try to limit that. This is the original St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church that was built on Liberty Street in 1864 and was in use to 1922 when the new church was built that's on High Street, and this became the Knights of Columbus Hall. It would be very hard to recognize the present building as a former church because the windows have been covered over. The spire has been removed from the front, so the front is flat. The entrance is now on the side, on the left side in this view, so it's very much changed, but the building is still there. This is the present St. Mary's Church, and except for a parochial school that now stands to the rear, and an addition that you don't see in this view that was put on in 1949 on the other side, it remains very much unchanged. You could hold this up today and say, okay, doors have been changed in the front, but very, very little else. I kind of like things like this. It's not so easy to pick out individual buildings, but it sure does give a nice view of what a town looked like. This is from the vicinity of Buck Hill, which many of you may have heard of or know where it is. It's a pretty prominent hill when you're heading west on Route 46, almost through town. It's where the Easter cross and the Christmas star has stood for, well, the star since 1947, the cross since 1959, and they're lit every year. As a matter of fact, it was a very touching tribute. They lit the star this year on 9/11, which I thought was a very nice thing to do. Another building that's very prominent on the main street in the middle of town, the Trinity Methodist Church. Again, except for additions to the rear, the front facade is very much unchanged. So sometimes it validates what a building has looked like over the years. Sometimes you find out how much it's changed. Don mentioned before about the view telling us what's not there anymore, and this is an excellent example of it. This is a view looking from the corner of Grand Avenue west on Main Street on the down the side of the street. And the buildings that show in this picture up until, let me sneak to the other side here, up until this point burned down in a major fire on May 5th, 1942. It destroyed what's known as the Shields Building, or was known as the Shields Building. It's where the People's National Bank was originally located. This store in the corner, which was a confectionery store and then a cigar store, that was lost. A large dry goods store, but about half of the block was leveled in that fire. I can remember as a kid, I was born in 1942, but I can remember as a kid walking up and down Main Street, and to me it looked like a crater. Pretty much the size of this area right here, where these buildings stood, and they had excavated where the foundations were and everything else, and it stood empty for a few years before the bank was rebuilt right on the corner. And this is the bank that now occupies that corner. The other view was looking right up the street, and almost behind the pole you can see that last building, or you know where that last building was located that I said was the survivor, if you will. So everything else that you see there in that view was what was rebuilt in the late 1940s, 1950 time frame. This is a view looking down the street, south on Main Street, and again, at the very edge of the picture you can see that building that I said survived, and then you can see next, well not next to it, but a couple doors away, the Shields Building and how tall that building was. That's where the Masonic Lodge was located. There were businesses, offices there, in addition to the bank being on the first floor. It was, I think, a total of a 4-story building. Again, we know what the Hackettstown Public School looked like when it was first built. It was actually built in 1875, but this view obviously was taken a few years later, but before the first edition was put on it in 1915. Then we can see in this picture, although it's an older view, pretty much what the school looks like today, and it's now our middle school, grades 5 through 8. Now, I should go back one second here. The first view that I showed you, this piece is embedded, is embedded in the center of this building, as additions were built all the way around it. The Morris Canal. Many communities in this state, across the northern part of the state, have connections with or association with the Morris Canal. Hackettstown being one of them, because the canal actually formed part of the border of the town between Independence Township and Hackettstown on the southeasterly side. This is a view, again, Buck Hill would be over here, M&M would be in the distance, and this is a view where two boats are passing in a widened section of the canal, and they had these pieces in the canal that were a little wider so boats could pass, because normally the typical prism of the canal, that is the waterway, was only wide enough to accommodate a boat snaking its way along. Another card that I like was a Boy Scout troop number 2, sponsored by the International Order of Oddfellows in Hackettstown. So a club sponsored this troop, but again a view that we treasure, I treasure. Okay, if you've been through town in the last 10 years anytime, you've seen our new Soldiers Monument, which is on the southern end of Main Street, where it intersects with Mill Street, which is Route 46, or a continuation of Route 46, and Mountain Avenue. And this statue stood in that corner. As you're looking at this view, that house behind the statue is where the Shell Station is now, and what we call the 5 Points intersection. So the statue was oriented that it looked up Main Street, if you will, from the 5 Points intersection. It was built in 1896, or it was erected, and I think it cost a princely sum of $700 for the statue and the placement and so forth. It had fountains on the bottom of it with watering troughs for small animals and horses, or dogs and horses, if you will. They were at 2 different elevations on alternate sides. And it stood there until the Department of Transportation came along by 1927, said that it was interrupting traffic too much and had to go. And in the process of trying to move it, it crumbled and was lost and was more recently replaced. This also depicts what you can see by the caption here, the white border era of cards, which is the next stage, kind of roughly 1915 through 1930. There are cards of other eras that have a white border on them, but this is really the start of it as far as the postcard style. The American House, again showing a white border view, stood on the corner of High Street and Main Street, right across the street from the bank building that I was just showing you. It was obviously a very imposing and handsome building, and as you look down the left side of it, there were actually storefronts in part of the building there, as well as the hotel operation, the upper floors, and the restaurant in the part that's facing us in this view. It was raised in 1930 to make way for progress. We needed a gas station in the middle of town. And that's what was built there. And next to it, you'll see in another view here, that little building next to it was actually built when Newberry's first established their building in Hackettstown. But again, a document of what the first gas station to occupy that site looked like. Thank you, Joan. This is the building now, the B&R Uniform Building, which was the Newberry building. A young girl, I think she was 21 or 22 years old, painted this very nice mural on the wall of the building some years ago. I got to say that this is the gas station that was originally a Gulf station, replacing the one you just saw, and has, you know, boxier, little bit more modern appearance. And then when the gas pumps were taken out, this fellow has, for years, has run the business that he calls Rich Fix-It, an automotive repair business. But I got to compliment this guy. He is just meticulous taking care of this place. Instead of wasting the little space and just leaving pavement out front, he elevated that with some dirt and put sod in there and keeps flowers around it, and has a grouping of flags around it that he maintains. And he's the one that invited this mural to be added to the building just to spruce up the corner. Really complements the corner nicely. Now we look at a couple of Main Street survivors in this modern photo, and that obviously the last one was also, but just to show you where some of these buildings have survived. The white building in the about the center of the photograph there, we referred to as the beehive because of the symmetry of the windows and the round arch at the top of the windows. It just acquired the nickname of beehive. And if somebody catches me on Main Street and asking about buildings or something, and I would mention the beehive, and they'd say, the what? Because they wouldn't catch what until I caught myself and would explain what it is I should have said. As you approach Hackettstown on Route 46 and you're entering town, crossing the Musconetcong River here, the old mill building stood there. One time the Grundyke Mill, a couple of different names that it carried over the years. And it too went to rack and ruin and was finally condemned and razed in the late 1950s. I think after a couple of damaging fires, it was finally condemned and razed, and a little bit of the foundation is left, and that's about all. Oops, sorry. Another interesting card, a black and white view, but just with the sky tinted blue on it. There is a series of these, several of them from Hackettstown, and I imagine other towns as well, they did this with just tinting the sky or certain parts of the card, and an otherwise black and white card. This shows you again what's now L. David's restaurant in town and catering business, just how the building has survived over the years, pretty much unchanged from what it looked like for probably a century and a half. Another little known reminder or remnant here. There's a series of these cards that was put out documenting the Second Service Command Training School in Hackettstown, and actually that was on Schooley's Mountain Road. It says Hackettstown, so it's in my collection. As I said, if it says near Hackettstown, although it doesn't state it, but I had to have these. And this is where Heath Village now stands on Schooley's Mountain Road. But at the time, it was from 1942 to 1945, it was a training school, and actually a lot of state police and a lot of civilians attended this school as hometown security, if you will, or what we now know as the home security. But that would have been it in its infancy during World War II. There's a whole series of these that show some of the insides of the buildings better and some of their maneuvers, but I brought one along just to illustrate. Obviously the others are in my albums. Don's going to smile now at the next few here. Greetings from Hackettstown. The Kurt Teich Company, am I saying that correctly? Kurt Teich? Kurt Teich, thank you. Put this whole slew of cards out along with a couple of other companies. They were the primary suppliers of a generic scene that could be greetings from any place. This happens to be Hackettstown. Lord only knows where that view was taken, but I've got a few of them here just for general amusement. Greetings from Hackettstown. I can pretty much guarantee that's not anywhere around Hackettstown. This one kind of fits, but actually somebody took the time to type the caption on this one in a typewriter. Maybe somebody bought these and sold them in a store, or sporting goods store, or something like that, and just typed their caption on it along the Musconetcong. Well, it was along some place where trout were caught, but just as likely as not, Hackettstown it might not be. Fishing is good here. Kind of fits very nicely because the trout fishing in the Musconetcong is well known. Again, the Musconetcong River, another forgotten piece of the past, or by most people. Sandbar. Before the town pools were built, swimming took place in the Musconetcong River, and the Recreation Department had actually built this pier in the middle of the river with a diving dock on top of the pier. The pier still stands in the middle of what's left of the Musconetcong River. It's almost just a puddle at that point right now, but obviously runs faster when we've got a good amount of rain. But in the dry season, there isn't much of a supply of water left there, and certainly nothing to dive into. What's your nickname?
Diner Don. I was wondering if you'd show the Hackettstown Diner.
Don, if you pick that up, Don is also known as Diner Don for the interest in and expertise in diner postcards. I happen to like this one. Again, it captures the day. One of the dining cars pretty much undoubtedly manufactured in New Jersey. There were a couple of companies maybe tell me where or tell us where. Do you remember?
5 different diner manufacturers, major diner manufacturers in New Jersey.
In New Jersey, 5 of them, okay, and there were a couple. But building these diner cars, which were transported by truck, set on a foundation and went in business. This was the place to be when I was a teenager, or one of the places to be. Leo's hot dog stand on Main Street was another one, but there's not a postcard view of that. Not that I know of anyway. Obviously the cars sitting out front pretty much date this as being at least 1952. There's a 52 Mercury on the far right. I can recognize that. So 52 or 53 or 4 Chevy over here. So it's right in that early 50s time frame.
And that burned down at the Hackettstown.
It did, yeah. It was very much modernized some years back with a false stone front on it and so forth. Pretty ugly, but it is what it is. And then actually it was torched by the owners who weren't doing very well. And in the process, well, this is open knowledge, and one of them was badly burned in the process. He got caught up in the fire and was badly burned, and was in rehabilitation for a while before he could even stand trial. So it was unfortunate for a couple of reasons. Then we go to a building which has a couple of businesses in it today. Hackettstown Plumbing's on one side of it. There's a jewelry store in it. It's a multi-use building now. But when built, it was another restaurant called the Derribar. You can just barely see the sign out front here, the Derribar restaurant. Privately owned and operated, and there was a farm right across the street with the cow herd right on the other side of Route 46, as you can see. And this is on Route 46 as you're going east, almost to where the Target store is now, but on the flat there. And a little sidetrack here. They were famous for the large sundaes that they produced and sold. And one of them was a banana split with, I think, 3 stacks of ice cream in it and whatever toppings you could stand to have on it. And they called it the pig's dinner. That was their name for this dish. Pretty appropriate name. Well, if you could finish eating one of them, you got a button which I'll lay on the table over here that states very proudly, "I was a pig at the Derribar." I didn't earn that, by the way. Again, this is a what we call the photochrome era, roughly 1939 when this process started. Basically, full color pictures as we know them today, the Kodachrome or photochrome process, a glossy finish to them. This card probably dates from 1955 or thereabouts, 1950 to 55, which makes it 60-some years old, and it's still scoffed by many collectors as being modern. They have no interest in it. Well, a card that's 60 years old is hardly modern in my humble estimation. Nevertheless, they don't harken back to the heyday of collecting, which you've seen up till now, with the cards of the early 1900s, the 20s, 30s. And that's why some people don't have an interest in them, because they don't capture the original era, if you will. But they do capture something historic. The church stands today, St. James Episcopal Church on the corner of Washington and Moore Streets, very much unchanged, including the parsonage on the far right. However, in the back, the old church hall was taken down about 5 years ago, but it was replaced with a very tastefully designed building. A couple of people, myself included, shuddered when we heard that was being torn down. But I have to say they did a fine job of making a building a very tastefully designed addition with arched doors on it which match the windows or are compatible with the windows and front door of the church. One of my alma maters, again a photochrome card, shows how St. Mary's Parochial School looked when it was first built and opened for the 1951-52 school year. There's since been an addition put on the front, so the long steps are no longer there. There's a classroom addition across the front, so it's quite changed from that view. I happen to have been in the first graduating class out of the school. And the odd part is, I think it was 21 of us, but 4 years later we were in the first graduating class out of the new high school. So it just happened that the schools had graduating classes 4 years apart, first and first. Now we get into advertising, which spans quite a number of decades, if you will. Obviously, the American Sawmill and Machinery Company put out this card advertising one of their large sawmills. I'm told that they had saw blades on some of their sawmills as large as 52 inches in diameter. So that's a pretty substantial sawmill. Also, these big mills weren't very well guarded. They were nothing but an accident waiting for a place to happen, and I'm sure many did. You can see on the side here that it could be belt driven off of a tractor wheel or a wheel on a motorized vehicle, or have an engine of some sort attached to it for a variety of drive mechanisms. The American Sawmill and Machinery Company capitalized on another event in Hackettstown. In 1937, Bet Cooper, who is pictured here, was crowned Miss America for 1938. She was a Hackettstown resident, 17 years old at the time that she won the contest. And a little bit more of the story goes that I really don't think she knew what she was getting into, because the way they picked the contestants for the states were through local fairs and state fairs and such. And the New Jersey contestant was chosen from the Miss Bertrand Island contest, which took place each summer. And that developed and provided the candidate for the Miss America contest, that being Bet Cooper in 1937 for the 1938 year. Obviously, they're hawking a pair of American beauties here. Their Sawmill and Miss America. Pretty clever advertising. Only one of these I've ever seen, and the only piece of hard advertising material other than newspaper ads from this particular business, Richter's Vulcanizing Shop, tire recapping and repair shop on Main Street. When my father moved to my parents, I should say, moved to Hackettstown in 1939, my father got his first job here, and unfortunately he realized that John Richter was a pretty abrasive character, pretty nasty with his customers, and also a pretty bad drunk, which explained the rest of the what I just said. So he didn't stay there very long. He went on to other opportunities. Excuse me. Advertising continues with a picture of a former home that was used as a home for tourists through the 1930s and 40s. This picture probably dates to the late 30s, I'm going to guess, and that's strictly a guess on my part. It was, as I say with the caption here, it was again razed, as many buildings are in anybody's town, hometown, and this being one of them, it's now a parking lot. But at least we have the image of what the building did look like. This was my father's Ford dealership in Hackettstown. He had this building built as a car dealership, had the Ford agency at the time. And this is on Mountain Avenue, right across from the Union Cemetery. It's now storefronts in the front of it, and an addition has been put on. You can pretty much see the shape of the building there. The facade's been much changed though. And there's a bagel shop, there's a nail shop, and a few different businesses in there, and they come and go, individual stores. But again, it captures the original look of the building, and it's one that's important to me. This, by the way, dates from 1949. I don't know if it's, don't think it's dated, but anyway, I know that it's 1949. That's when he opened the agency here. Then we get into the souvenir cards. And we have a generic card again here, could be from any place, and it's going to say lots of fun at MENDHAM or Hackettstown or Peoria, Illinois, or any place else that they printed the name of a town on it. But they're still neat. They're still collectible in my estimation. Cards were made of many materials, leather being one of them. I wouldn't doubt that this leather was supplied by the Lackawanna Leather Company. I have no reason to believe otherwise, being that the company was a few blocks away. I don't know who did the burning of the image on it. I think it was all hand done. I've seen one other of these cards that looks very similar, but you can see enough differences and nuances to know that they weren't stamped, that they were done individually. So how many of them are out there, I don't know, but probably not a whole lot. And a souvenir wood card. You'll have to hurry in Hackettstown, and the next thing I'll be doing is hurrying to the conclusion of my presentation. I don't know if there's any questions, but this is my wrap-up from beginning to end. Yes?
On the cards, like the wood cards and the linen cards, where would people write, or didn't?
Oh, okay. The back of this card, they call it wood. It's a wood tone card. Now, I guess some of them have an actual lamination of wood, but this is just a wood tone card on the front with a paper back. And when I say I made didn't really explain it thoroughly there, when we refer to the linen cards, it's actually just a crosshatch design or impression on the front of the card that looks like cloth or linen, and it's commonly referred to as linen card, but it's not linen cloth. I should have, thank you for catching me on that. I should have explained that more thoroughly. But it is a paper card with just that textured finish on the front that's commonly referred to as linen. Flavor for the hobby. What would you say is maybe one or two of the most obscure categories that customers may have approached you asking about or inquiring about?
Oh, wow, you name it.
Just a couple of examples, just to demonstrate how far-reaching the hobby is.
There are so many. I mean, if somebody names a topic here, I'll tell you if it existed on postcards. You know, I mean, I've had people that wanted to collect postcards of people standing on their heads. You know, and you could assemble a collection of that. If you like oysters, you could assemble a collection of postcards relating to oysters, both the oyster business or postcards that have oysters shown on them.
Right.
I mean, just to give you...
Yeah, this is just an example of how far-reaching the hobby is, and there's probably not a topic that isn't covered by someone's postcard collection.
Flower or anything.
Right. Anything else? Okay. Yeah.
Right. When did the fully tinted postcards first come out? You had one there with just the sky tinted, and then another building that was fully tinted.
That was just a choice of processes. That wasn't any particular era, because there were full color cards coincident with that at the same time. That was just one of the styles of cards, just to be catchy, if you will. Yes, Charles?
Ray, in the 40s, the radio show, The Quiz Kids, was sponsored by Mars. Second part of the question, was Mars existing in Hackettstown at that time?
No, actually, there's a story within a story here. The M&M Candy Company, or Mars, was established in Newark, New Jersey. And I'm going to ask my wife Angie to help me out here. Was it 2 locations in Newark that they had, or East Orange and then Newark? Okay. All right. And then they bought property in Hackettstown, which was a farm, in 1956 and began building the plant in Hackettstown, and opened up operations there in stages in 1958. And that's when the plant opened in Hackettstown. So they would have been in Newark at the time of this program that you're referring to. The story within the story is that Angie's father, my father-in-law, worked for M&M in Newark, and she and her family resided in Orange, New Jersey. And he transferred to Hackettstown when the plant opened, and they bought a house in town. I met Angie, and we've been married now almost 48 years. In November, it'll be 48 years, so that's the story within the story. So thank you, M&M. Joan.
This isn't about postcards, but do they know your association with the Hackettstown Historical Society?
I don't think we covered that, but...
No, just briefly, you've been a part of that.
Well, okay, a little bit about me. I serve as town historian in Hackettstown. I'm a charter member of the Hackettstown Historical Society. When it was founded in 1975, we also started our little museum that same year. When we have the fortunate use of a town-owned building as our museum in town. So I've been helping out there those 37 or so years. And currently archivist and curator there at the museum. So.
What were the streets covered with, the cobblestone or sand?
Some of the early views, you'll see that the streets were dirt. And then they were macadamized, which was a mixture of tar and stone, but not paving as we know it. But it was a transition from dirt streets to macadam to paved. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, for all your postcards, are there any stereopticons?
Yes. I have well, I think I've donated them to the Historical Society by this time, which I usually do with things that I acquire in antiquities. But yes, there are 6 or 8 views that I know of that exist of Hackettstown. We have a few at the museum.